You know for a fact that the world is doomed when the armor that talks about waifus all day is bringing you a guide type video. But it's happening. Today I'm bringing you the build that I plan to use later this week when the DLC finally arrives. For reference, I'm doing all of this in New Game Plus 3. The Carian Paladin build is a strength and intelligence focused build that allows you to play as a regular knight, but also have a ton of spells for all sorts of situations. There are different directions you can take this build if you wish to improve the damage, but I'll talk about that later on. Because for me, fashion comes before stats. First, let's have a look at your gear. You can acquire this all pretty early since it's all located in Liurnia of the Lakes. You'll be rocking the Carian Knight sword and the shield alongside the Carian glintstone staff. The sword has good range, decent scaling for strength and intelligence, and it looks really nice. The Carian Grander Ash of War is also amazing for bosses, and it can stagger them easily and deal just really good damage overall. The Carian shield is basically the best option for any intelligence focused build that wants to use a shield. You can keep the base Ash of War. After all, Carian Retaliation is amazing. It provides you with over double the amount of parry frames on any medium shield, which makes it way easier to learn how to parry. And you can also parry spells. That's right, you turn them into these little swords and you fire them back at the enemy. Basically, you can tell the mage builds to get fucked. And the glintstone staff is amazing because it boosts all the damage dealt with Carian sword sorceries. Since we're on the topic, let's talk about the spells I use for this build. There are 3 main spells that I recommend you use. Number 1 is a Duelist Moonblade. This thing is great at dealing with large crowds, and if you can land both the swipe and the projectile, you will deal even more damage. Secondly, we got the Carian Piercer. This is more of a PvP thing since it can roll catch really well, but it's also great for smaller bosses like Melania because you can hit him with a fully charged Carian Piercer and go straight into a fully charged Carian Grander. I wish I could show you some footage of me doing this, but I already killed Melania. And I'll do it again. The last recommended spell I have for you is Terra Magica. This one is a bit tough to use since you move around a lot with this build. After all, you're not really stationary firing off spells, you're going to the enemy face to face. But there are times where you can get the spell down and it will basically double your magic damage. A couple of useful things here are basically when you want to use a long range spell or just you want to charge up a Duelist Moonblade just before a large crowd goes after you. And I do have a few optional spells that you can slot in, like Ronnie's Dark Moon. This is great for casting at the start of a boss fight so you can get that frost proc. I also have Loretta's Mastery, which is a great ranged option, but in reality you can slot anything else you want here. I just recommend you take a ranged option. Now the armor that you choose for this build doesn't really matter as long as you have 51 poise. Having that 51 poise will allow you to stagger way less when you're charging the Carian Grander, which will in turn allow you to get more of those off alongside Carian Piercers. I just kind of went with something that looked a little bit like a Paladin, so I chose the Knight's Helmet, and the rest is just the Cocoon Knight set. But like I said, you can go with whatever you like because you won't lose any damage from changing any of the armor sets that you see on screen. Just try to make sure that you reach that 51 poise, and more importantly, that you look fucking badass. When it comes to stats, things aren't necessarily hard. I'm level 200 here, but you can do this from, I would say, 120 easily. Try to reach a minimum of 30 strength and another 50 on intelligence. Vigor would be above 40 ideally, and Mind and Endurance would also be ideal to have above level 25. If your strength and intelligence are matched at 50, then I would recommend you level intelligence until 80, and if you got loads of extra levels, get faith to 30 so that you can use Golden Vow. When it comes to your flask, I just try to go for the one that boosts your magical damage as well as your stance damage, but again, it's flexible. You don't really lose out if you don't use these exact settings. As for the Talismans, there are 2 main sets that you can choose from. One focuses on damage and the other will focus on survivability a little bit more. That first damage set will have you using the Godfrey icon to enhance your charged Carian Grander, Magic Scorpion Talisman to increase your overall magic damage, Shard of Alexander to further boost your Ash of War, and then the Dagger Talisman to increase your critical hits for when you break the opponent's stance. You can also swap the Dagger Talisman for the Urge Tree Favor if you want, it's up to you. And if you want to do that second, safer version, then basically you do the the exact same thing, but you'll be swapping that last slot for the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to increase your physical damage negation. Finally, a few last minute tips. You can also swap out the Carian Knight's sword for the Dark Moon Greatsword if you want. And if you want to do even more damage, you can use the full Snow Witch set or the Spellblade set. I would really recommend the Spellblade set if you're going for damage because it will boost your magic damage by 2% by piece, meaning you can get a whopping 8% magic damage boost if you're wearing the full set. Out of all the builds that I've come up with in my 600 hours of Elden Ring, stuff like Faith builds, Flame Art builds, Strength builds, and Bleed builds and whatnot, the Carian Paladin is a very strong and flexible build that will get you through the entire game, no problem. You can even take this into New Game plus because you can pump more levels into Strength, Intelligence, Faith, and even Dexterity if you fancy. I personally love sword spells in Souls games, and Elden Ring made them even more appealing. Plus the fact that this build doesn't necessarily rely on spamming spells or buffing 100 times, you can even just play without using any spells really, is pretty cool. The sword and board combo allows you to get in some nice counters, and even parry most of the enemies, which is also really good to learn in these kinds of games. You can strike quickly and swiftly with your sword, or go for huge hits against the bigger bosses. It also doesn't really suffer much against enemies with high magic resistance, as you got plenty of strength to just punch your way right through. But that's been all for me today. This is the first guide I've ever made, so I'm sure you guys will find a few things that could be better. If so, then please drop a comment with your feedback. But I'll get going for now. Stay safe, and until we meet again.